everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're diving into something really special, the earliest days of the Harry Potter world. I'm talking way before Harry, way before Voldemort, even before Hogwarts was built. We're going all the way back to when magic was wild and untamed, when the first witches and wizards were just figuring out what they could do, and the magical world as we know it didn't even exist yet. All the way to Harry and his scar being born. Real quick before we get started, if you're into these deep dives, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out way more than you'd think, and it shows me you actually want more of this stuff. The history of the wizarding world does not begin with the familiar stone halls of Hogwarts or the busy streets of Diagon Alley. It stretches back into the distant mists of the ancient world, tracing the earliest known uses of magic to the civilizations of ancient Egypt and classical Greece. Long before wands were invented or ministries were founded, magic was a raw, primal force, often inseparable from the religious beliefs and occult practices of these powerful early empires. In Egypt, the early wizards and witches, often priests or mystics, were renowned for their sophisticated understanding of curses, charms, and elemental transfiguration. Utilizing their magical prowess to build impossible structures, ward off invaders, and delve into the mysteries of the afterlife. Their magic was deeply tied to ritual, incantations, and the power drawn directly from the natural world and the celestial bodies. The legacy of their ancient, potent spells is said to be preserved in the deepest parts of the pyramids and in texts lost to the ages, laying the very groundwork for the development of magical theory that would follow centuries later. Yet, it is from ancient Greece, around the 1st century after the birth of Christ, that one of the most significant and terrifying figures in dark arts history emerges, Herpo the Foul. Herpo was a wizard of immense, perverse power and singular dedication to achieving what all dark wizards desire most: immortality. He was a pioneer in two of the most infamous and dangerous branches of dark magic, both of which would plague the wizarding world for 2 millennia. His first terrible creation was the basilisk, a creature so feared and so deadly that its very existence defined the limits of magical defenses. Herpo achieved this grotesque feat by hatching a chicken egg beneath a toad, a deliberately perverse, dark ritual that perverted the natural order. The resultant creature was a massive serpent with brilliant yellow eyes, capable of instantly killing any living being that met its gaze directly, and whose venom was one of the few substances capable of destroying a Horcrux. The basilisk became the perfect biological weapon, a terrifying symbol of Herpo's early dominance and his willingness to twist nature for his own dark ends. But the creation of the basilisk, though horrifying, paled in comparison to Herpo's second, more profound contribution to the dark arts. He was the first known wizard to successfully create a Horcrux. This darkest of all magical arts is the process by which a wizard deliberately commits the most vile of sins, murder, to tear their own soul apart. A fragment of the shattered soul is then magically encased and hidden within an external object, which then becomes the Horcrux. As long as that fragment remains intact, the wizard cannot truly die, anchoring their existence to the world, even if their physical body is destroyed. Herpo, the Foul's successful creation of the first known Horcrux, was a monumental event in magical history, demonstrating that true immortality was magically possible, albeit at the ultimate cost of one's own soul and sanity. This act opened the door to the deepest abyss of the dark arts, establishing the horrific blueprint that future dark wizards, most notably Lord Voldemort, would follow in their own quest for eternal life. The pursuit of the Horcrux became the definitive act of ultimate evil, forever tying Herpo's name to the most profound violation of natural and magical law. The profound darkness of Herpo's inventions stood in stark contrast to the less formalized but immensely potent, wandless magic of the era. Wizards and witches of the ancient world, including those who would later go on to found the great European magical traditions, did not use wands. Their magic was harnessed through intense focus, deep knowledge of incantations, and sheer, raw, personal power. This wandless magic required a level of concentration and innate power that is rarely seen in later centuries, where the wand provides an easy, reliable focus. Ancient wizards were capable of spectacular feats of elemental manipulation and powerful spell casting without any external conduit, relying solely on the strength of their mind and will. This distinction between the primal power of the ancients and the more refined, channeled magic of the later, wand-using Europeans would become a defining cultural divide in the wizarding world, marking the end of the classical age and the slow, necessary centralization of European magical practice. The shift from the raw, powerful, wandless magic of the ancient world to the standardized use of the wand in Europe represents one of the most critical turning points in wizarding history. Wands were not always a universal tool. Their use originated and spread primarily across Europe during the early classical period. Before their invention, wizards and witches relied entirely on their own internal power and complex incantations, often resulting in accidental magic, uncontrolled bursts of energy, and a high reliance on immense, innate magical talent. The vast, powerful magic of the ancient Egyptians, or the terrifying, wandless power of Herpo, the Fowl, demanded a level of focus and raw magical strength that was unsustainable for the general wizarding population. The wand was invented as a practical stabilizing solution, a tool designed to focus, channel, and direct magical energy more reliably and efficiently. Crafted from specialized woods, each possessing unique properties and containing a core of potent magical substance, such as phoenix feather, dragon heartstring, or unicorn hair, the wand became the perfect magical conduit. It acted as an amplifier and a precision instrument, allowing wizards and witches of average magical ability to perform complex spells and charms with a level of control that was previously impossible. The invention democratized magic, allowing a wider range of people to practice the craft safely and effectively, laying the groundwork for standardized magical education and the professionalization of the wizarding world. However, the adoption of the wand was never universal. Many powerful, older wandless traditions persisted outside of Europe, particularly in parts of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. These cultures maintained their reliance on raw magical power, sophisticated gesture-based magic, and deeply ritualistic practices, often viewing the wand as a crutch or an unnecessary restriction on true magical expression. They were capable of immense feats, but their magic was often more volatile, requiring greater dedication and inherent power. This divergence created a subtle but significant cultural and political divide, setting the stage for future misunderstandings and conflicts as the European wizarding world began to standardize its practices and exert its influence globally. The necessity of the wand in Europe was arguably driven by the growing need for secrecy and precision in a world increasingly dominated by Muggles. As the Muggle population grew and technology advanced, accidental magic became a greater threat to the preservation of the magical world's hidden existence. The wand provided a means of controlling magic precisely, preventing large, spectacular magical outbursts that could be witnessed by non-magical folk. The ease and consistency provided by the wand meant that magical power could be better regulated, controlled, and eventually policed by the emerging wizarding governments. This slow transition from raw power to channeled precision was a direct response to the external threat of Muggle persecution. This external threat, which was growing across the European continent and would eventually erupt into the terrifying witch hunts of the medieval period, was the primary factor driving the decision to centralize magical education. Prior to the 10th century, wizarding education was largely conducted through apprenticeships, familial instruction, or small, scattered schools. This decentralized model was becoming increasingly dangerous as Muggle suspicion and fear escalated. The need for a single, massive, and powerfully protected sanctuary where young witches and wizards could learn to control their power, safely hidden from the hostile outside world, became paramount. This realization, spurred by the need for secrecy and the standardization brought by the wand, directly led to the shared vision of the four greatest magical minds of the age, culminating in the founding of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in the rugged, remote Scottish Highlands. The wand itself, a symbol of controlled power and European magical tradition, would become an essential tool within the walls of this new institution, forever marking the beginning of a new era of centralized learning and cautious isolation. The founding of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in the 10th century was not a celebration of magical achievement, but a desperate, necessary response to a period of intense crisis for the European wizarding world. The early medieval period was characterized by widespread persecution of magic users across the continent. Driven by fear, ignorance, and religious zealotry, Muggle authorities engaged in brutal witch hunts, often resulting in the torture, execution, and forced displacement of witches and wizards. The sheer scale and indiscriminate violence of this persecution made the formerly decentralized lives of magic users untenable. Wizarding families could no longer safely rely on isolated apprenticeships or small, easily discovered local schools. The need for a single, secure, massive sanctuary became the overriding priority for the wizarding community. This sanctuary had to be completely hidden from the eyes of the Muggles, defended by the most powerful magical wards imaginable, and capable of safely educating hundreds of young minds who were at risk of unleashing destructive, accidental magic in the public view. It was into this atmosphere of fear and urgent necessity that the four greatest magical minds of the age stepped forward, pooling their vast knowledge and unique magical talents to build the castle that would become the heart of British wizarding culture. The four founders were towering figures of magical history, each representing a crucial aspect of magical power and philosophy. Godric Gryffindor, famed for his courage and martial skill. Helga Hufflepuff, known for her loyalty, fairness, and deep affinity for the earth and practical magic. Rowena Ravenclaw, celebrated for her fierce intellect, wisdom, and strategic mind. And Salazar Slytherin, a master of ancient magic, particularly the dark arts of manipulation and parseltongue. Their initial collaboration was a magnificent display of unified genius, a collective effort driven by the shared goal of protecting their kind. They chose the remote, rugged landscape of the Scottish Highlands as the site for their school, specifically because the terrain was difficult to access, sparsely populated by Muggles, and inherently suited for massive magical concealment. Their combined power wove the most sophisticated protective enchantments in existence over the castle, warding it from both physical and magical intrusion. The most enduring protection was the spell that concealed the entire massive structure from Muggle eyes, ensuring that if any non-magical person stumbled upon the castle, they would only see a ruin or a dangerous, unwelcoming patch of land. This level of intentional, massive concealment marked an early, decisive move toward the eventual Statute of Secrecy, cementing the magical community's intention to live entirely in the shadows. While the primary motivation was self-preservation, the founders also had a secondary, more hopeful goal: to establish a standardized, excellent form of magical education. They sought to preserve and advance magical knowledge, ensuring that the ancient arts would not be lost due to persecution or the death of the old masters. Each founder poured their unique talents into the school's curriculum and its very architecture. Gryffindor focused on courage and dueling, Hufflepuff on practical charms and herbology, Ravenclaw on theoretical knowledge and intellect, and Slytherin on the subtleties of spellcrafting and the darker, more manipulative aspects of magic. Despite their differing philosophies, their early years were characterized by a profound sense of purpose and camaraderie. However, these very philosophical differences, particularly concerning the selection of students and the threat of the outside world, would eventually tear apart their friendship and plant the fatal, ancient seeds of conflict at the very heart of the school, leading directly to the ultimate schism between Salazar Slytherin and the other three. The construction of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry required not only the immense magical power of its four founders, but also the alignment of their distinct philosophies, a partnership of genius that would eventually prove too fragile to last. Godric Gryffindor and Helga Hufflepuff were perhaps the most philosophically balanced of the quartet, sharing a fundamental belief in the value of inclusivity and practical heroism, even if their methods and priorities differed greatly. Their combined influence helped shape the earliest, most open-minded vision for the school, a sanctuary built not just for survival, but for fostering the best in every young witch and wizard. Godric Gryffindor, hailed as one of the greatest duelists and bravest wizards of his time, was the embodiment of courage, daring, nerve, and chivalry. He was not only a master of protective charms and martial magic, but a fierce proponent of using magic to protect the weak and confront injustice. Gryffindor's influence is most clearly seen in the school's dedication to heroism and moral fortitude. He believed that the single most important quality in a wizard was not intellect or lineage, but the willingness to face danger and the courage to do what is right, even at personal cost. His own legendary feats, including his masterful swordsmanship and his willingness to fight the rising persecution from the Muggle world, established him as a true leader, guiding the early construction and defense of the castle. His initial vision for the students he would accept was broad. He sought out those who displayed bravery, regardless of their background, setting a high standard for moral courage that would define his house for a millennium. Gryffindor's focus on direct, honorable action and his outspoken belief in defending the Muggle-born witches and wizards against the growing tide of prejudice made him an immediate philosophical counterweight to the darker, more suspicious views emerging from one of the other founders. In sharp contrast to Gryffindor's martial focus, Helga Hufflepuff represented the crucial pillars of loyalty, hard work, patience, and unwavering fairness. Hufflepuff was a master of domestic and elemental magic, excelling in charms related to food production, healing, and the deep, abiding connection between the magical world and the natural earth. She was the one who ensured that the hundreds of students and staff within the massive castle would be nourished and cared for, using her expertise to create the perpetual food enchantments that stocked the massive kitchens beneath the Great Hall. More than any other founder, Hufflepuff championed the idea of equality among all magical people. Her profound sense of fairness led her to declare that she would accept all students who were willing to learn, provided they possessed the core virtues of loyalty and diligence. Her house, Hufflepuff, became the most inclusive, taking those who did not fit the stringent criteria of the other three, a choice rooted in her deep conviction that every witch and wizard, regardless of talent, lineage, or social standing, deserved a safe haven and an education. This radical inclusivity was a powerful, necessary rejection of the growing pure-blood supremacy that was already beginning to poison parts of the wider wizarding world. Hufflepuff's emphasis on kindness, cooperation, and the practical application of magic formed the ethical bedrock of the school, ensuring that Hogwarts was not just a fortress, but a true home. Together, Gryffindor and Hufflepuff formed a unified, compassionate front, believing firmly that the school should be a welcoming beacon for all magical talent, a belief that would soon bring them into direct conflict with the divisive ideology brewing within their ranks. The final two founders, Rowena Ravenclaw and Salazar Slytherin, embodied contrasting forms of magical brilliance that would define the two most ideologically driven houses of Hogwarts. While Godric Gryffindor and Helga Hufflepuff focused on virtue and heart, Ravenclaw and Slytherin concentrated on mind and ambition. Their shared genius initially driving the school's academic supremacy before their diverging philosophies led to permanent schism. Rowena Ravenclaw was arguably the greatest intellect of the four, possessing an unparalleled capacity for abstract thought, wisdom, and creativity. Her legendary brilliance was instrumental in developing the complex architectural designs and educational philosophies that allowed Hogwarts to function as the premier institution of learning. It is widely believed that Ravenclaw was the inventor of the ever-changing, intricate floor plan of the castle itself, and that she personally devised the powerful enchantment that imbues the Sorting Hat with the combined intelligence and personality of all four founders, allowing it to magically read the minds of new students and assign them to the appropriate houses. For Ravenclaw, the singular most important quality in a witch or wizard was the pursuit of knowledge and a powerful, keen mind. She sought out those students who demonstrated sharp intellect, wisdom, originality, and a relentless curiosity, believing that magical advancement rested entirely on the intellectual capacity of its practitioners. Her house, Ravenclaw, therefore became the sanctuary for the bookish, the inventive, and the strategically brilliant, fostering a culture where logic and originality were valued above all else. Her quest for wisdom, however, was not without its shadows, as her own history would tragically prove that genius alone cannot solve the complexities of the human heart, a weakness mirrored in the fate of her own family. In stark contrast, Salazar Slytherin was a man defined by his ambition, cunning, and profound, ancient magical knowledge. He was a master of the subtleties of the human mind, known for his skill in legilimency, the magical art of entering and navigating another person's mind, and his rare gift of parseltongue, the ability to speak to and control snakes, a trait immediately associated with the darkest aspects of magical practice. Slytherin's philosophical contribution to Hogwarts was a focus on shrewdness, resourcefulness, leadership, and a disdain for the easily manipulated majority. He was a pragmatist who believed that magic was a tool to be wielded by the most capable, and his house, Slytherin, became the breeding ground for the strategically ambitious and those driven by a quest for power and self-advancement. However, this powerful ambition was tragically fused with a deep, consuming distrust of Muggles and, crucially, Muggle-born witches and wizards. Slytherin believed that magical knowledge and power should be preserved only for those of pure magical blood, viewing Muggle-borns as untrustworthy outsiders who were likely to betray the wizarding world to the hostile, non-magical population. This belief was not merely philosophical. It was rooted in the profound fear and persecution experienced during the era of the witch hunts, a fear that warped his dedication to self-preservation into an ideology of pure blood supremacy. Initially, these contrasting forms of genius worked in harmony, providing the school with a well-rounded educational foundation covering heart, mind, and ambition. Yet, the deep chasm that lay between Helga Hufflepuff's radical acceptance and Salazar Slytherin's obsessive rejection of Muggle-borns proved too wide to bridge. Slytherin's insistence on excluding certain children from the safety and education of the castle was a direct betrayal of the founder's original shared oath to protect all magical people from the persecution of the outside world, creating a schism that would eventually fracture their magnificent creation forever. The fundamental disagreement over Muggle-born students became the fatal flaw in the founding unity of Hogwarts, marking the beginning of the end for the legendary partnership of the four founders. Salazar Slytherin's deep-seated prejudice against those not born into magical families transformed from a private suspicion into an ideological demand, one that was violently opposed by Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, and Rowena Ravenclaw. This conflict over the definition of the wizarding community was not a mere political squabble. It was a profound, irreconcilable difference that defined the trajectory of the British wizarding world for centuries to come. Slytherin's worldview was heavily influenced by the constant threat of Muggle persecution during the 10th century. He had likely witnessed or suffered immensely during the witch hunts, twisting his desire for magical survival into a hardline belief that only pure-blood wizards could be trusted. He argued vehemently that teaching magic to Muggle-borns was a dangerous risk, believing that they were either untrustworthy spies or, at the very least, too culturally ingrained in the Muggle world to maintain the absolute secrecy required for the survival of the magical community. For Slytherin, the inclusion of any Muggle-born students was a potential contamination, a weakness that could eventually lead to the exposure and destruction of their newly built safe haven. The other three founders, however, viewed this demand as an intolerable betrayal of their shared oath. Helga Hufflepuff stood firm on her principle of unwavering fairness and equality, arguing that magical ability, not blood, was the only relevant criterion for acceptance. Godric Gryffindor, valuing courage above all else, argued that any student brave enough to face the hostile wizarding world deserved their place in the school, and he frequently engaged in fierce, passionate duels and debates with Slytherin over the issue. Rowena Ravenclaw, the intellectual, likely argued from a position of pragmatic knowledge preservation, recognizing that excluding bright, magically capable students based purely on ancestry was a colossal waste of intellectual potential. The three united against Slytherin, refusing to bar entrance to any child who displayed clear magical talent. The continuous, escalating tension eventually tore apart the friendship and the collaborative spirit that had built the school. Slytherin found himself increasingly isolated, his dark, fearful ideology rejected by the moral and intellectual consensus of his peers. His conviction was so absolute and his paranoia so entrenched that he refused to yield, believing that his former friends were naive and risking the future of the wizarding world. The ultimate consequence of this political and personal schism was Slytherin's fateful decision to abandon Hogwarts. He chose to leave the school he helped create, withdrawing his considerable talent and ancient knowledge, rather than share the sanctuary and the magic with those he deemed unworthy. But Slytherin's departure was not clean. It was marked by a final, terrifying act of vengeance and precaution. Unable to destroy the school or reverse the decision of his friends, he used his unique powers and immense knowledge of dark magic to create a lasting mechanism to achieve his goal after his death. Before he left the castle, Salazar Slytherin secretly constructed the Chamber of Secrets, a massive hidden chamber deep within the school walls. This chamber was designed to house a living weapon, his monstrous basilisk creation, intended to be unleashed by his true heir centuries later. The sole purpose of this hidden weapon was to purge the school of Muggle-born students, a final, ultimate rejection of his friend's inclusive vision and a testament to the destructive power of pure blood ideology. The existence of the Chamber of Secrets thus became a silent, ticking time bomb, a legacy of ancient betrayal left at the heart of the safest place in the magical world. The departure of Salazar Slytherin from Hogwarts was the final, tragic end of the Founders' unity. but his legacy of pure blood prejudice was left behind, permanently woven into the very fabric of the castle through the construction of the Chamber of Secrets. This hidden chamber is the ultimate testament to Slytherin's profound paranoia and his unwavering commitment to his ideology of Muggle-born exclusion. Unable to sway his three friends, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, and Rowena Ravenclaw, to his cause, Slytherin took his vengeance and precaution into his own hands, utilizing his mastery of ancient, dark magic to conceal a weapon within the school he had helped to build. The Chamber of Secrets was built in deep secrecy, utilizing powerful, complex concealment charms and architectural manipulation that only a master wizard of Slytherin's caliber could achieve. It was hidden deep beneath the dungeons of the castle, designed to be completely inaccessible to anyone but his direct descendant and true heir. The entrance was cleverly disguised, requiring the unique hereditary ability of Parseltongue, the language of snakes, to unlock. This specific requirement ensured that the weapon stored within could only be wielded by a direct member of his bloodline, guaranteeing that the chamber would remain dormant and protected until a wizard who shared his extreme pure blood views and his rare gift could return to unleash its terror. The contents of the chamber were far more dangerous than any simple magical artifact. It housed the monstrous, genetically engineered serpent known as the basilisk. This creature, the terrifying creation pioneered by Herpo the Foul centuries earlier, was the perfect tool for Slytherin's final, murderous goal. The basilisk possessed the unique ability to instantly kill any person who looked directly into its enormous yellow eyes, and its sheer size and destructive power made it an unstoppable predator within the confines of the castle. Slytherin left precise instructions, passed down through the generations of his bloodline, that when his true heir finally returned to the school, they were to unleash the basilisk and use its deadly power to purge the student body of all Muggle-born witches and wizards. This final act of biological terrorism was intended to achieve, centuries later, the exact exclusion and pure blood protection that Slytherin had failed to negotiate with his former friends. The existence of the Chamber of Secrets and its deadly hidden occupant was kept a secret for nearly 1,000 years, passing into the realm of legend and fearful whispers among the student body. The other three founders were likely aware that Slytherin had left the school with immense bitterness, but it is highly unlikely they knew the specific deadly nature of his final act of betrayal. The castle was warded against dark magic from the outside, but it contained a deep, hidden corruption within its walls, a testament to the destructive power of personal betrayal and entrenched prejudice. The basilisk's continued presence within the castle walls, merely sleeping and awaiting the Parseltongue command of the heir, created a constant, profound danger that undermined the very purpose of Hogwarts as the safest place in the wizarding world. The long-term impact of the Chamber of Secrets was immense. Its legend became the historical justification for future proponents of pure blood supremacy, including Lord Voldemort, who would later identify himself as Slytherin's heir and use the Chamber's secret to terrorize the school. The Chamber serves as a terrifying physical reminder that the most dangerous threats to the wizarding world do not always come from external enemies like Muggles or dark wizards, but can originate from the internal ideological rot and deep-seated prejudice within the very institutions designed to protect them. The memory of the chamber and its basilisk remained a dark, ancient curse on the school, lying dormant until a wizard possessed of both Slytherin's magical blood and his deadly ambition finally returned to finish the job he started 1,000 years earlier. While the founders were constructing their secret fortress in Scotland, the threat from the Muggle world continued to escalate, eventually forcing the global wizarding community to make a catastrophic, permanent decision. to completely withdraw from the non-magical world and live entirely in the shadows. This monumental event was the formalization of the International Statute of Secrecy in 1692, a global decree that redefined the relationship between Muggles and wizards forever. The necessity of this radical isolation was driven by the worst period of Muggle persecution in history. The most infamous example of this extreme persecution were the Salem witch trials of the late 1600s in the American colonies. While this event is known in Muggle history, the wizarding version of the events reveals a deeper, more brutal reality. The trials were a terrifying period of mass paranoia, religious fanaticism, and indiscriminate violence against anyone accused of being a witch or wizard. Even the most careful hidden magic users were at risk, and the events resulted in the deaths of many innocent witches and wizards, serving as a brutal, visceral reminder that the Muggle world was too dangerous, too unpredictable, and too technologically advancing to coexist with. The constant, indiscriminate nature of the witch hunts, not only in America but across Europe, proved definitively that any attempt at open integration or peaceful coexistence was futile and would result in the annihilation of the magical population. The Wizards' Council, the predecessor to the later Ministry of Magic in Britain and the various wizarding governments globally, recognized that a localized, fractured defense was no longer viable. The sheer number of accidental magical outbreaks and intentional magical acts being witnessed by Muggles had reached a critical mass, threatening to expose the entire secret community and unleash a final, organized purge by the Muggle authorities. The only solution was a unified, global action to disappear completely. Therefore, in the year 1692, the Statute of Secrecy was signed, a comprehensive legal framework agreed upon by almost every existing magical government. The statute was an absolute law. It strictly prohibited all witches and wizards from using magic in the presence of Muggles, with only extremely limited exceptions for life-threatening emergencies. All magical creatures, including the most common, visible beings like dragons and griffins, were designated for mandatory concealment or relocation to magical preserves. Most significantly, the statute mandated the complete withdrawal of the magical community from Muggle society. This meant closing all visible magical schools, removing magical creatures from Muggle eyes, and relocating to entirely isolated magical towns and protected areas. The creation of fully wizarding villages, such as Hogsmeade in Scotland, became the new norm, sanctuaries where magic could be practiced freely and safely away from the eyes of the non-magical world. This withdrawal created the shadow government and the isolated parallel society that Harry Potter would later encounter. The wizarding world became a hidden entity, living in plain sight, but entirely undetected by the technologically advancing Muggles. This was achieved through massive, powerful concealment charms, Muggle-repelling wards, and complex memory modification charms administered by specialized groups like the Obliviators. The International Statute of Secrecy was the most defining moment in modern magical history, solving the problem of persecution by simply eliminating the possibility of contact. However, this isolation would eventually create its own severe problems, fostering an environment of cultural arrogance and ignorance among some wizards who saw Muggles as inferior, a prejudice that would later be ruthlessly exploited by dark wizards like Gellert, Grindelwald, and Lord Voldemort. The period following the implementation of the International Statute of Secrecy was one of enforced stability and withdrawal, but this isolation eventually bred the conditions for the rise of a new, terrifying breed of ideological fanaticism. Long before Lord Voldemort plunged Britain into the fear of the First Wizarding War, the global wizarding world was convulsed by the rise of Gellert Grindelwald, a dark wizard whose ambition was not merely personal power, but a complete, radical restructuring of global society. Grindelwald's war was the first truly global magical conflict of the modern age, dwarfing all previous skirmishes. Gellert Grindelwald was a figure of singular, compelling genius and immense charisma, possessing a magical power that was second only to that of his later rival, Albus Dumbledore. His ideology was based on a complete rejection of the Statute of Secrecy, which he viewed as a cowardly, self-imposed restriction on the rightful dominance of the magical community. Grindelwald argued that wizards and witches, being magically superior, had a moral right and even a duty to end the isolation, step out of the shadows, and establish an open, benevolent dictatorship over the Muggles. His rallying cry, which he often carved into monuments, was, "For the greater good," a cynical justification for what was fundamentally a violent, supremacist agenda. This ideology resonated deeply with many disillusioned pure-blood wizards who felt constrained and hidden by the statute. Grindelwald successfully gathered an immense following across Europe and beyond, establishing a ruthless military structure that would later be mimicked by Voldemort's Death Eaters. His followers were drawn to his captivating personality, his genuine intellect, and the intoxicating idea of finally shedding the mantle of secrecy and ascending to their rightful place as the rulers of the world. Grindelwald's ultimate goal was to prevent Muggles from destroying themselves and the world with their own escalating, dangerous technology, believing that only the superior wisdom and power of wizards could save the planet, a self-serving rationalization for conquest. Grindelwald's ascent to power was marked by a campaign of terror and political destabilization across Europe during the 1920s and 30s. His primary targets were the ministries of magic and the institutions that upheld the Statute of Secrecy. He launched massive, high-profile attacks on magical government centers, resulting in widespread death and chaos, forcing the various magical governments into a state of continuous emergency. The conflict escalated into a true global magical war, with magical law enforcement and armies mobilized across continents to fight Grindelwald's growing forces. This war was fought concurrently with the rising Muggle tensions that would eventually ignite World War II, creating a complex and dangerous overlay of conflict between the two hidden worlds. The one person capable of stopping Grindelwald was his former confidant, intellectual equal, and closest friend, Albus Dumbledore. Dumbledore, recognized even then as a wizard of unparalleled power, possessed the moral clarity and magical might required to face the Dark Lord. However, their history was intensely personal and tragic. They had shared a profound, complex bond in their youth, dreaming of a world free from secrecy, a dream that Grindelwald later warped into his supremacist vision. Furthermore, Dumbledore was bound by a deeply painful past event involving his sister, a tragedy that made him hesitant to ever confront Grindelwald directly. It was this complex, personal connection between the two most powerful wizards alive that allowed Grindelwald's global campaign of terror to continue for well over 2 decades, threatening to completely unravel the entire fabric of the isolated wizarding society established after the Statute of Secrecy. Gellert Grindelwald's relentless war against the Statute of Secrecy was not solely driven by political ideology. At the core of his destructive ambition lay a profound, consuming obsession with the legendary artifacts known as the Deathly Hallows. Grindelwald believed, with fanatical conviction, that the wizard who possessed all 3 hallows would become the Master of Death, a figure of ultimate magical power who could transcend mortality and command the very forces of life and death. This quest transformed his political movement, the supposed fight for the greater good, into a deeply personal and dangerous hunt that steered the course of the first global magical war of the modern age. The Deathly Hallows are fabled objects said to have been created by death itself and given to three magical brothers of the Peveril family in ancient times. The legend recounts that the first brother, in his arrogance, demanded the Elder Wand, an immensely powerful, unbeatable wand crafted from elder wood. The second brother, seeking to recall his lost love, asked for the Resurrection Stone, a stone with the power to summon the shades of the dead. The third brother, who was the wisest and most humble, requested the Cloak of Invisibility, a cloak woven to be impervious to all spells and capable of completely concealing the wearer from death itself. Grindelwald's search for these objects was not merely an academic pursuit. He truly believed that mastering the Hallows was the key to fulfilling his goal of wizarding dominance over Muggles, granting him the unquestionable authority to rule. His obsession with the Hallows was profoundly influenced by his brief, intense relationship with Albus Dumbledore during their youth. The two brilliant young wizards spent an electrifying, transformative summer together, exchanging ideas and theories about magic, politics, and the ancient legend of the Hallows. They initially shared the ideal of the greater good and dreamt of finding the Hallows together, believing they could usher in an era of benevolent magical rule. This shared quest created an unbreakable complex bond between them. However, Dumbledore, influenced by a family tragedy involving his sister, eventually recoiled from Grindelwald's escalating darkness and cruelty, recognizing that the pursuit of the Hallows, especially the unstoppable Elder Wand, was corrupting the ideological dream into a violent pursuit of totalitarian power. Grindelwald's focus was primarily on the Elder Wand, which, unlike the other two Hallows, has a verifiable, bloody history stretching back centuries. Its path was marked by duels, betrayals, and murder, as wizards sought to claim its immense power by defeating its previous owner. Grindelwald managed to successfully track down and steal the Elder Wand from its current owner, the Wandmaker, Gregorovitch, during a daring raid in Europe. With the most powerful magical artifact in his possession, Grindelwald's campaign of terror escalated dramatically. The Elder Wand made him virtually unbeatable in a duel, lending credence to his claim of being the master of death and making him an unstoppable force that terrified the magical governments of the world. The long, devastating duration of the Grindelwald War, spanning decades across the 1920s, 30s, and early 40s, was largely a result of the Elder Wand's power and the reluctance of the only wizard capable of matching him. The hunt for the Hallows, particularly the acquisition of the unbeatable wand, allowed Grindelwald to hold the wizarding world hostage, using his charismatic ideology to recruit fanatics while relying on the wand's unmatched magical might to protect him from the combined forces of the international ministries of magic. His quest for these ancient relics of power ultimately defined the entire era, leading inexorably to the legendary confrontation that would decide the fate of the magical world. The global magical conflict, initiated by Gellert Grindelwald, reached its climax in the year 1945 with the legendary, world-changing duel against Albus Dumbledore. This confrontation was not simply a battle between light and dark. It was a deeply personal tragedy and a necessary, painful reckoning between two of the most brilliant and powerful wizards in history. The duel took place at the very moment the Muggle world was concluding its own devastating global war, an ironic synchronicity that marked the end of two monumental, destructive eras. For decades, Albus Dumbledore had avoided confronting Grindelwald, even as the Dark Wizard's campaign of terror and genocide swept across Europe. This reluctance was rooted in the profound, traumatic events of their shared past. In their youth, Dumbledore and Grindelwald had formed an intense, intellectual bond, dreaming of a magical revolution guided by the Deathly Hallows. However, their relationship ended in tragedy when a chaotic three-way duel between Dumbledore, Grindelwald, and Dumbledore's younger brother resulted in the accidental death of Dumbledore's sister, Ariana. This trauma and the lingering love and guilt Dumbledore felt for Grindelwald created a powerful magical barrier, preventing him from facing his former friend and lover. He feared discovering which of them had actually cast the spell that killed his sister, and he was terrified of repeating the devastating conflict that had shattered his family. However, as Grindelwald's atrocities escalated, and as the fear of his elder wand fueled his seemingly unstoppable path to global dominance, Dumbledore was forced to recognize that his personal pain could no longer outweigh his moral duty to the world. The magical governments, terrified and defeated, placed their final, desperate hope in Dumbledore, recognizing him as the only wizard who could possibly defeat the master of the Elder Wand. In a monumental act of courage, Dumbledore finally broke his emotional oath and agreed to face Grindelwald. The duel itself is remembered as the single most spectacular, powerful magical confrontation ever witnessed. It was a clash of titans, showcasing the absolute pinnacle of magical skill, strategy, and raw power. Dumbledore and Grindelwald were evenly matched in intellect and magical ability, but Grindelwald wielded the Elder Wand, the legendary artifact that was supposed to make its owner unbeatable. The details of the fight remain the subject of endless wizarding study, but the outcome was decisive. Albus Dumbledore emerged victorious. He managed to overcome the unbeatable wand, demonstrating a skill and power that surpassed even the Master of the Hallows. The defeat of Grindelwald in 1945 brought an immediate, palpable end to the decades-long global conflict. Grindelwald was captured and imprisoned in Nurmengard, the terrifying fortress he had personally constructed to house his enemies, a poetic end to his tyrannical ambition. Most importantly, upon his defeat, the Elder Wand changed allegiance. As its master, Grindelwald had been defeated by Dumbledore. The wand's power transferred to Dumbledore, who took possession of the most dangerous and coveted magical artifact in existence. Dumbledore, recognizing the destructive allure of the wand, kept its existence a profound secret for the rest of his life, choosing to wield it not for conquest, but for the quiet defense of the magical world. The outcome of the duel solidified Dumbledore's reputation as the greatest wizard of the age, giving him the moral and magical authority necessary to guide the British wizarding world through the tumultuous decades that would follow, setting the stage for the rise of an even darker threat. In the shadow of the great global war against Gellert Grindelwald, a new, more insidious darkness was already taking root in Britain, personified by the ascent of Tom Riddle, the wizard who would become Lord Voldemort. Riddle's story is the perfect example of how the insidious ideology of pure blood supremacy, planted centuries earlier by Salazar Slytherin, could be resurrected and warped by a single, terrifyingly ambitious individual. Tom Marvolo Riddle was born in a Muggle orphanage, the son of a wealthy Muggle, Tom Riddle Sr., and a descendant of Salazar Slytherin, Merope Gaunt. His early life was marked by profound isolation, a ruthless intellect, and an unsettlingly early awareness of his magical power, which he used to control and torment the other children at the orphanage. When he arrived at Hogwarts, recruited by Albus Dumbledore himself, Riddle was the epitome of a charming, brilliant student, charismatic, academically unmatched, and seemingly destined for greatness. He easily captivated his teachers and peers, rapidly ascending to the position of prefect, and eventually head boy. However, beneath the veneer of the model student lay a deep, consuming darkness, fueled by two core obsessions: his hatred of his Muggle heritage and his quest for immortality. Riddle's discovery of his lineage, that his father was a Muggle who had abandoned his magical mother, instilled in him a profound, self-loathing rage that he projected onto all Muggles and Muggle-born witches and wizards. He became obsessively focused on his connection to Salazar Slytherin, viewing his pure blood ancestry as the only legitimate part of his identity. He successfully located the hidden chamber of secrets deep within the school, confirming his status as the heir of Slytherin. And, during his 5th year, he unleashed the basilisk, resulting in the death of a Muggle-born student named Myrtle, a shocking and terrifying incident that was covered up by the school. The quest for immortality led Riddle to the forbidden vile magic pioneered by Herpo the Foul, the creation of Horcruxes. Horcruxes are objects in which a dark wizard hides a fragment of their soul after committing murder, thus anchoring their existence to the mortal world. Riddle's ambition, however, transcended the mere creation of one. He sought the mystical, dangerous number of 7 Horcruxes, believing that the division of his soul into 7 parts would grant him absolute, perfect immortality. This required multiple murders and the systematic destruction of his own soul, transforming the handsome, charismatic Tom Riddle into the terrifying, psychopathic creature known as Lord Voldemort, a carefully chosen anagram of his birth name, signifying his utter rejection of his Muggle identity. By the 1960s and early 1970s, Lord Voldemort had shed his birth name completely, surrounding himself with a growing army of fanatics known as the Death Eaters. These followers were primarily pure-blood wizards who shared his supremacist ideology and were drawn to his immense power and the promise of ruling the wizarding world. Voldemort's rise marked the beginning of the First Wizarding War in Britain, a bloody campaign of terror aimed not at exposing the magical world to Muggles, like Grindelwald's, but at purifying the wizarding race itself, starting with the systematic murder of Muggle-born witches and wizards and the targeting of prominent figures who opposed his pure-blood regime. His metamorphosis, from the brilliant student to the Dark Lord, was complete, plunging the isolated British magical community into a darkness far more profound and personal than the world had ever faced. The rise of Lord Voldemort in the 1970s plunged the British wizarding world into a period of prolonged, agonizing civil war, known simply as the First Wizarding War. This conflict was fundamentally different from the global ideological struggle waged by Gellert Grindelwald a generation earlier. While Grindelwald sought to conquer the Muggle world, Voldemort sought to purify the magical world, viewing his campaign as a crusade to cleanse the wizarding race of Muggle influence and establish a strict hierarchy based on pure magical blood. This narrow, vicious focus turned the war into a terrifying, internal conflict that pitted neighbor against neighbor, shattering the safety and stability that the Statute of Secrecy was meant to ensure. Voldemort built his power base upon the twisted ideology of pure blood supremacy, an ancient prejudice traceable back to Salazar Slytherin. He viewed Muggle-born witches and wizards as genetically inferior and an abomination to the magical lineage, demanding their eradication or complete subjugation. His inner circle and army, the Death Eaters, were fanatical followers drawn almost exclusively from ancient, powerful pure-blood families who yearned for a return to a pre-statute era of dominance and unchecked power. They were united by their shared hatred of Muggles, their fear of a changing world, and their absolute, terrifying loyalty to Voldemort, who promised them immortality and a share of his eventual total power. The tactics of the Death Eaters were centered on terror, assassination, and political destabilization. They did not engage in large open battles like Grindelwald's armies. Instead, they targeted key figures and families who opposed the pure blood doctrine. Muggle-born witches and wizards were prime targets, often kidnapped, tortured, and murdered as a public demonstration of Voldemort's merciless intent. Prominent members of the Order of the Phoenix, the secret resistance organization founded by Albus Dumbledore, were systematically hunted down. The Death Eaters were easily recognized by their chilling uniformity. The dark robes, the masks, and the ubiquitous presence of the Dark Mark, a symbol of a skull with a snake emerging from its mouth, which they used to brand their loyalty and mark the sites of their atrocities. This psychological warfare was immensely effective, breeding a widespread paranoia that made even the safest wizarding communities, like the villages around Hogsmeade, feel vulnerable and exposed. The Ministry of Magic, the official governing body of the British magical community, struggled profoundly to cope with this internal threat. Their standard law enforcement methods were ill-equipped to deal with a clandestine terrorist organization led by a wizard of Voldemort's unparalleled power and skill in the dark arts. The ministry was quickly infiltrated by Death Eaters and their sympathizers, creating a climate of institutional corruption and political chaos that effectively paralyzed the government's ability to respond. Aurors, the elite magical police force, found themselves fighting a desperate, losing battle, overwhelmed by the enemy's numbers, power, and mastery of the unforgivable curses. 3 spells: the Imperious Curse, the Cruciatus Curse, and the Killing Curse, that were the hallmark of Voldemort's terrifying reign. Against this rising tide of darkness stood the only truly effective force of resistance, the Order of the Phoenix. Founded and commanded by Albus Dumbledore, the Order was a secret society composed of loyalists, brave Aurors, and ordinary citizens willing to risk everything to fight Voldemort. They operated outside the compromised ministry, focusing on intelligence gathering, the protection of targeted families, and direct confrontation with the Death Eaters. The Order included some of the bravest heroes of the era, such as James and Lily Potter, Sirius Black, and Frank and Alice Longbottom. Their tireless efforts, fueled by Dumbledore's strategic genius and moral authority, were the only force preventing Voldemort from achieving total, undeniable control over the British wizarding world. The entire community was locked in a bitter, bloody stalemate, where fear was the most common currency and trust was the most dangerous commodity. The already desperate atmosphere of the First Wizarding War was dramatically heightened and irrevocably changed in 1980 by the utterance of a prophecy, a magical prediction that would ultimately seal the fate of both Lord Voldemort and the infant Harry Potter. This prophecy was delivered by Sybil Trelawney, a descendant of a powerful seer, during a private interview with Albus Dumbledore at the Hogshead Inn. Though Trelawney herself was not a true seer during the interview, the prophecy was genuine, a rare instance where the powers of divination truly accessed the tapestry of fate. The prophecy foretold the birth of a boy at the close of the 7th month, the month of July, who had the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. Crucially, the prophecy stated that neither can live while the other survives, clearly establishing that a final, deadly confrontation between the two figures was inevitable, and that the world was not large enough for both of them to exist freely. The prophecy immediately placed 2 newborn boys, born in late July of 1980, into the crosshairs: Harry Potter, born to James and Lily Potter, and Neville Longbottom, born to the esteemed Aurors Frank and Alice Longbottom. Both boys matched the physical and temporal criteria set forth in the prediction. However, the full prophecy was never heard by Lord Voldemort. A crucial part of the prediction was overheard by Severus Snape, a Death Eater working as a spy for Dumbledore. Snape, upon hearing that a child was destined to destroy his master, immediately reported the information back to Voldemort. This incomplete transmission of the prophecy was the critical, fatal turning point. The full prophecy stated that the Dark Lord would mark him as his equal, meaning that the ultimate designation of the prophesied one would be made by Voldemort's own action. Voldemort, driven by his own personal history and paranoia, chose to believe the prophecy referred to Harry Potter. Voldemort's choice was deeply rooted in his own supremacist prejudices and his complex understanding of magic. He saw himself reflected in Harry's lineage, a half-blood like himself. Furthermore, The Potters had repeatedly defied him, their resistance burning fiercely. In contrast, Neville Longbottom was a pure-blood heir, a lineage Voldemort secretly valued and was more likely to spare or attempt to recruit. By choosing Harry, Voldemort validated the crucial part of the prophecy, marking the boy as his equal and sealing his own doom. The decision was an act of both magical and political arrogance, proving that the Dark Lord was, despite his immense power, easily manipulated by his own ingrained biases and deep-seated fear of death. Once Voldemort had decided to eliminate the Potter family, James and Lily were forced to go into immediate, deep hiding. They placed their trust in the powerful and complex Fidelius charm, an ancient spell designed to conceal a secret within a single, trusted person, known as the Secret Keeper. The hidden location of the Potters was placed under the protection of this powerful charm, with the hope that it would be enough to keep their son safe. However, in a tragic act of betrayal, the Potters made the fateful choice to switch their secret keeper at the last minute, selecting their supposed close friend, Peter Pettigrew, instead of the more obvious choice, Sirius Black. This catastrophic misjudgment, born from a desire to misdirect Voldemort, would lead directly to the destruction of the family and the pivotal events of Halloween, 1981, changing the course of magical history forever. The First Wizarding War reached its dramatic, bloody crescendo on the night of Halloween, 1981, at the hidden residence of the Potter family in Godric's Hollow. This night is not merely a historical footnote. It is the single most important moment in the history of Harry Potter and the entire modern wizarding world, for it resulted in the temporary downfall of Lord Voldemort and the creation of the boy who lived. Driven by the partial knowledge of the prophecy and the betrayal of Peter Pettigrew, Voldemort successfully breached the Fidelius charm and located the Potter family. He arrived at the cottage with the singular, terrifying goal of murdering the infant Harry Potter. The events unfolded with brutal speed. James Potter, attempting to buy his wife and son time, confronted the Dark Lord without his wand and was immediately and ruthlessly struck down by the killing curse, becoming the first casualty of the night. His death, a selfless act of paternal protection, demonstrated the profound courage that Voldemort's power could not extinguish. Voldemort then proceeded to the nursery, where Lily Potter stood before her son's crib. Lily, a fiercely intelligent Muggle-born witch, was presented with a choice. Severus Snape, Lily's childhood friend and unrequited love, had desperately pleaded with Albus Dumbledore to spare her life. Dumbledore conveyed this plea to Voldemort, who, perhaps out of curiosity about Snape's loyalty or merely as a fleeting moment of manipulative cruelty, offered Lily the chance to step aside. Lily, however, refused to move, making the deliberate, final, and ultimate sacrifice for her child. She placed herself directly between her son and the Dark Lord, knowing the confrontation meant her certain death. When Voldemort cast the killing curse, aiming to strike Lily down, her act of ultimate self-sacrifice invoked an ancient, powerful form of protective magic. This magic, rooted in the purest form of love, was not a standard spell, but an unbreakable, deep-seated magical law. Lily's willingness to die for her son created a powerful, unique magical ward that made the infant Harry Potter untouchable by the specific magical malice of Lord Voldemort. The curse, designed to strike down Lily, succeeded in taking her life, but the protective enchantment surrounding Harry instantly went into effect. When Voldemort turned his wand on the infant and cast the killing curse, Avada Kedavra, for the third time that night, the curse struck Harry but could not penetrate the ancient love protection. Instead, the curse rebounded violently onto Voldemort himself. The result was catastrophic for the Dark Lord. The curse shattered his physical body, tearing his spirit from the mortal realm. His power was utterly broken, and he was reduced to a desolate, barely existing fragment of a soul, forced to flee the scene and live in agonizing, bodiless torment for over a decade. In a terrible magical accident, a small sliver of Voldemort's shattered, weakened soul was violently torn off during the magical backlash and inadvertently lodged itself inside the only living magical thing present, Harry Potter. This tiny, damaged fragment of soul turned Harry into the final, unintended Horcrux, a living container for the dark magic that had sought to destroy him. The power of the rebounding curse left Harry with only a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead, the only physical evidence of the night's unparalleled magical explosion. The defeat of Voldemort, achieved by the selfless love of a mother, brought an immediate, stunning end to the First Wizarding War. The day after the event, Albus Dumbledore placed the infant Harry Potter with his Muggle relatives, safe under the blood protection of his aunt, ensuring that the magic of Lily's love would continue to shield him for the rest of his childhood, preparing the stage for the beginning of his own journey 11 years later.